Hello, everyone, and welcome to the February 2025 Higher Education Tableau User Group meeting. We're really glad that you could join us, whether it's from a cold climate like me or, a warmer climate like Florida. So we've got a lot of fun stuff for you today. We're going to start off with our announcements, followed by Meet a Community member, Professor Drinkwater, who you may recall is also our former co-lead for the HETUG chat. Followed by Christian Adams from the University of Washington, who's going to show us about using Prep plus Server to publish an online data source. And then if you want to stick around, we'll have our typical wrap up and chat. But if you don't want to stick around because you want to go to the CCC tug, we totally understand. So I'm going to open the floor to any other announcements before we make a couple of announcements related to the tug. So anyone want to come off mute, share an announcement, job posting, or put it in the chat if you don't feel like coming off mute. No takers. Well, then Roshni did put the Slack link in the chat box, and I will go ahead and make one announcement before I turn it over to Roshni. I would like to share with you all that Eric Atkinson, who you may remember as a TUG presenter, and he was also a Meet a Community member in the past, he has downloaded all of the available iPEDS Access databases and placed them on a shared folder housed on a Google Drive. So if these data become unavailable in the future because the NCES website, taken down, whatever, I don't know, you'll still have access to them. So I'll be sharing this link in the IR or institutional research channel on our higher education Slack group. So if you haven't joined Slack, there's yet another reason to do so. And the link is also on the AIR discussion board. So if you're a member of that, you can sign in there and access it as well. So that's my announcement. And then Roshni also has an announcement for everyone.
So you may remember from, I don't know, how many months ago was that? Like 6, 7, 8, 10, 12?
Yeah.
I don't know. Many,
Last
many months
fall.
ago. Yeah. We were able to get the funding to create a bunch of stickers for HETUG, and we have them. They are sitting underneath my desk as we speak in envelopes ready to send out. So it's time to start getting your stickers. There are 7 stickers. You can request them through a workflow that is not working yet. I'm sorry, we tried to test, and Christian was very, very patient during our tech check, trying it out, and I've broken something. But we will be having making the request available. It's just in the higher ed tug and in the general channels. If you see workflows, there's a little request HETUG stickers option. You click a little play button, and it'll open up a separate message that has another button that you have to press. I don't know how Slack workflows work, guys. So if anyone is a Slack workflow guru, please come teach me some Slack workflow fun, so that we can make this thing better and make it actually work. So there's that. And I just noticed a message from James Emery. The HEDW, so it used to be Higher Education Data Warehouse organization. Now it's Higher Education Data World. Their conference registration is open. It's a week before Tableau conference, and it's at Georgia Tech, if I remember correctly. So it won't be horribly steamy yet, and it also will not be super freezing. I'm also in cold weather now, so all right.
All right. In case you missed it, the DataFam Live Community Plus AI happened on January 30th, but the recording is now available. So you can catch that using the link or the QR code in the slide. I was not able to go to all of it, but the parts that I saw were pretty interesting. Mainly the community panel was the part that I got to see. And then we also, as Roshni mentioned, have Tableau Conference coming up in April of 2025 in San Diego. The registration for that is open, and we do have a little bit of information about the upcoming conference. Over 300 sessions, over 100 hands-on trainings, and 3 fabulous days in San Diego. I'm very sad not to be going this year. I can't even think about it, but Roshni will be there, and
I
I'm
will
sure a
be.
lot of rest of you will.
Hopefully. And we are hoping to be able to do at least one hands-on training session that is higher education content, higher education use cases. We've been working really hard with a bunch of the Tableau user group leaders in the education space. So the folks from K through 12, so Rob Kramer, David Ogden, University Teaching Learning, Dennis Cow, and others, CC Tug, Lisa Trescott, Kim Coots, Sam Homier. I'm missing a bunch of names, but a whole bunch of tug leaders in the education space have been working really hard with the solutions engineers and the account exec team on the higher ed side to try to make this higher ed hands-on session happen. We're making
It would be
progress.
amazing if it does.
Yeah, and we might have a super school data source, a usable super school data source available in the next few months or longer. We'll see. Fingers are crossed.
Yes,
Um,
definitely let you know.
yep.
All right, so they're also doing Tableau Boot Camp at the Tableau conference this year. So if you have any interest in immersive learning, path to certification, this has been a really great experience for some people in the past, and they do have early bird pricing right now. So take advantage, sign up. And that's all about Tableau Conference so far. Now I'm going to introduce our Meet a Community member who really needs no introduction. So Andrew, our former co-lead for HETUG, is moving into a new role as an adjunct professor, and he wants to spend some extra time with his small children and growing business. He'd love to keep in touch with all of us, and he's happy to check in with people on Tableau relationships and many other topics through the HETUG Slack, which he's very active in, I should say, and also on LinkedIn. So Andrew, as you've heard before, is the co-founder of Plaid Analytics, a company that specializes in enrollment forecasting, data integration, and governance for higher education specifically. He has an MBA and a graduate certificate in visual analytics, and he also teaches analytics and interpretation as a professor at the University of British Columbia. At Plaid, he leads initiatives like Plaid Forecast, a web-based enrollment forecasting platform that is collaborative, accurate, fast, and easy. And gosh, I wish I could say those things about enrollment forecasting. But so we have a slightly different set of Meet a Community member questions for Andrew today, since he's already answered the original set years and years ago. So Andrew, why did you want to teach?
Thanks for the kind intro, Jenny. As for why I wanted to get into teaching or get back into teaching might be the more appropriate phrase now. I think it's a really good way to give back to the community. So it's neat to see students build up some skills, spread their wings, and go on to change the world in their own ways is probably my biggest driver. I'll say a secondary one, though, is that it helps you recognize your own understanding and sometimes gaps in that. I had some fun teaching joins and relationships this week and going, oh, here's this fundamental thing that I missed that I can make a lot of sense of for people if I only included it in the general intro. And so it's a great way to reinforce my own knowledge as well and improve my teaching practice over time.
I cannot agree more, because you don't really understand something until you have to teach it to someone else. Completely agree. So what is the biggest challenge that you've encountered as a professor?
I think maybe two things. So one is more directly related to the classroom experience. So trying to find the right way to level set in an era where AI is impacting analytics as far as we can see in every possible direction, and figuring out what kinds of assessment techniques make sense in light of that has been an interesting challenge. And there's not a ton of resources from every institution on this. There's a handful of institutions that are pretty good at this so far, and lots are learning quickly, I would say. So I'd say that's one piece. And then there's more sort of the instructional background of creating materials is the second one. It takes more time than you think it will every time. And it often takes a while to find the resources in your institution. Like, for example, 2 or 3 weeks ago, I didn't think my institution had academic setups for things like GitHub and version control. And I learned a week ago that in fact they do. And it made a whole bunch of things easier as a result, but I obviously didn't know where to look in the first place. So I'd say that's part of the learning curve as well.
Well, I'm glad you found those. So what is the most surprising thing about going back to the classrooms?
That's a good question. I think for me, the gap between being in the classroom had been about 5 years. And in both cases, I've worked with pretty technologically sophisticated students. But I would say the idea of doing any lectures online or office hours even online was challenging for people 5 years ago in a way that now it's completely normalized thanks to the pandemic. One of the surprises though was we had a snow day, which is uncharacteristic of Vancouver. In fact, we've had like more than a week of cold weather and snow, which is very uncharacteristic for us. We are definitely the soft side of the continent for those curious. But rather than having a snow day in the way that I remembered from the past, where everything got canceled, they said every class is moving online. So you're canceled, but you're not. And that was perhaps the greatest surprise. It makes sense in hindsight. I just didn't see it coming.
Yeah, ever since I started working from home, there are no more snow days. It's kind of sad. What is the most interesting question about Tableau or about data that you've gotten from a student so far?
So I got one last night, as fate would have it, and maybe I'll see if I can screenshot the image and share it somewhere. But a student sent me an image that they'd found online, and at first glance it looked to me like a bar chart, a standard bar chart, and it was about like miles of railway or something to that effect. And it listed it by country. And so it had this bar chart and it had the flags of the countries on it, which I thought in Tableau you could do with an image roll relatively easily. But the part I didn't notice at first glance is that call it 9 of the 10 countries are your standard bar chart looking thing. But China has so many more kilometers worth of rail than anybody else for this purpose that their bar chart actually curved 90 degrees around. So it went to the end of the standard bar and then it turned a right turn and then it turned again and again and again. And it went 2 or 3 times around to convey that the magnitude difference there is, I forget the exact number, but I'll say it's probably between 10 and 20x their nearest competitor in terms of this particular metric. And so it was sort of a bar chart and sort of, I guess I'd call it some kind of a line chart. And when the student asked if it's possible, my answer is in Tableau, anything is possible, but this might take more effort than you imagine it could. But I couldn't help but think of resources like the Fleur-Ledger's blog to get them down the path of here's how you can do something beyond Show Me and beyond what's built into the tool. It's possible. It'll take some math. But I think that one caught me the most off guard. And it was a combination of I didn't even see what was different about it at first. My instinctive answer was, oh, this is easy. And then I looked again and went, oh, actually, this is really hard. And then just the design of the chart itself. So that was the greatest surprise so far. But the term is young.
Yeah, I have actually seen somebody do that in Tableau. Now, the question is, can I remember who did it and can I find it again? And if I do, I will send it to you.
Oh, we'd love that. That'd be great.
Yep. I want to say it was Andy Kriebel, but I could be very wrong about that. All right, so
guess.
I know you've answered this before when you were a Meet a Community member, but maybe it's changed because Tableau is always updating. What is your favorite Tableau feature?
Oh, I have answered that before, but I don't remember what I said. So if anybody's paying attention and wants to do a pre-post test, I'm super keen to see how consistent I am. These days, I would say Tableau's relationship data model is my favorite feature of the tool. It has opened up so many possibilities in ways that just would have been incredibly difficult or nigh on impossible when only using joins for the data. So as a fundamental data nerd engineer, that is by far my favorite. And then harkening back to 2007 when I first started using Tableau and they came out with maps would be my second.
I feel like that might have been your answer before too. You might be pretty consistent. All right,
First for
so
everything.
yeah. What topic are you most looking forward to teaching? And then which one are you dreading to teach?
Great question. So my course is a mix of, let's call it about 2 weeks worth of sort of basics in Excel around data cleaning and putting data together. And then it's 4 to 5 weeks worth of Tableau and 4 to 5 weeks worth of predictive modeling in Python. And I've inserted a week into there focused on analytics in the age of AI. So I'm both most excited and most nervous about analytics in the age of AI because there's no precedent in this course on what that could cover. So it's a blank slate, which is exciting, but there's nothing to build on, which is a little bit terrifying. I think for me, I've taught Tableau before, so I'm comfortable with it. And y'all have seen me present this a few times, so you probably recognize some of that comfort level. I have not taught Python before. So I'm cautiously optimistic, but very nervous about teaching that to others for the first time. Um, and I'm excited what we'll learn together, though, because I think the tools to learn these things are so much better than they were when I learned how to program years ago. You can learn a lot of things from saying, how do I do this into an AI tool and seeing what it comes up with. And you find you learn things. So I'm actually pretty excited to teach it in that era. I think it's a different set of challenges than it would be if I taught it 10 years earlier, for example.
That sounds like a class I would like to take. So, what are your students finding the most difficult about using Tableau, and what are they picking up like Canucks to ice hockey?
Um, so the one that seems to be the trickiest for people who don't have any kind of a database background is understanding the concepts of merging data together. So by that, I really mean joins and relationships in the Tableau context. But there's also user experience gap related to the same. That was just as true when I taught Tableau 5 years ago as it is today. Um, if you click data source at the bottom left of any of your workbooks, it takes you to, I'm not 100% sure whether it's the primary data source or the most recent one that you've edited, but inevitably, if you want a second data source in the same workbook, it doesn't take you to the one that you're thinking it takes you to. And so I find students trip over that quite a bit and they end up modifying the wrong data source rather than the one that was intended. And to me, this is a combination of I need to write better instructions on that part. And also the tool doesn't give enough feedback that you may not be in the right place. So that's been the tricky one for that.
And then what are they doing well with, or did I completely miss that answer?
Uh, I was talking about joins relationships are difficult for people without the background in it, and then just how do I edit a data source and make sure it's the right data source was the second part of that.
Okay. So I know it's still the beginning of the term, but in hindsight, is there anything you wish you could have taught differently?
Oh yes, lots. Um, I think I would have tried to cluster some of the summary statistics content a little closer together. So what I found is I didn't deviate too far from the ordering that had been done previously because that was the best start I had on what might work well. But we covered summary statistics in Excel, like medians and so on. And then there was maybe a 3 week gap until we started addressing the same concepts in Tableau. And I think it would have landed a little better if those two were closer together. I'm not sure which one should move, but I think having them close together would reinforce the learning better than what ultimately happened. So from the teaching perspective, I think that's one that I wouldn't mind having a second go at. And then the more general statement is, if you're like me and you've been using this tool for almost 20 years, you can go through some things really, really fast, which results in you cramming an awful lot of content into each class. And that's hard for a beginner to keep up with. And so finding the right balance on those things of knowing like this is more detail than somebody needs, even though I think it's important, I think that's the other more general, you'd want to do over, take good notes each week on what worked well and what didn't, so that the next time you teach this, if you get that chance, you have something for how to improve.
That's really good advice because it's hard for me to remember what it was to be a beginning Tableau user.
Yeah.
So, what have you learned from teaching or from your students that you think the HETUG community should keep in mind as they work with stakeholders in their data and data viz practice?
I'd say the biggest one is find ways to incorporate multiple perspectives, whether that's getting different people around the table to ask questions or see the results, or whether that's you're designing visualizations that can allow for multiple perspectives. So one of the activities we did fairly early on in the course was I think I had about 10 groups at that point, and I gave them each a printout of charts that I'd found in various news clippings and things like that, and asked them to critique them based on various visualization principles. And one of the peculiarities of teaching visualization in Canada is utterly inescapable to avoid charts about US election results in your practice. And so they come up a lot. And one of these was about the US election result. The particular news station had arguably embellished the difference between some percentage point and some percentage point that was one or two lower than that, and by truncating the axis. So it made it look substantial when it was very debatable. And most people agreed on that. But one person said, and he said, I'm from Australia, so I really could care less about this, but I'm curious if this candidate actually won and they won the House and the Senate and the presidency, that you could argue actually that this was an effective way to present this information, because whether they won by a single percentage point or many, the end result was the same. And it was a perspective I hadn't considered. And so I thought that was really interesting. So I'd say that's probably the biggest thing from the students is different people bring different backgrounds to the data problems that you're encountering. And that's just as true of students as it is of higher ed administrators and all the other people that we work with in this sector. And making space so that they can ask their questions in a way that they don't feel judged, and that they can learn something new from it or contribute something new for others to learn, I think is really important in the era that we find ourselves in, whether that's with political data or anything else for that matter.
That's a fantastic example and bit of advice. So, is there anything else you would like to share before we go to your dashboard spotlight?
Can I add one thing just about the HETUG in general?
Yeah,
would that be okay?
of
Excellent.
course.
Okay. So I find it a bit amusing that I'm currently moving from being the Tableau relationship guy to being the absent-minded professor, but I hold both very near and dear to my heart. And what I wanted to say is it's been phenomenal to be a part of this group, and I'm grateful for the opportunity to have helped lead it over the last few years. And Jenny and Roshni are fantastic to work with. So if you're considering what could be your next volunteer opportunity to help lift up the community, I would highly recommend this. I'd be happy to talk to you about my experience. So yeah, I just want to say that's been phenomenal. And more generally outside of the organizing group, I can't believe how active this community is. I've never seen any judgment on people making, the wrong choice with a chart or a data source setup or anything like that. It is genuinely helpful and wonderful to be a part of. So I just wanted to give my 2 cents there. While the penny still exists, at least one of our countries, that it's a great group to be a part of, whether you're a member or an organizer. And if you're thinking about organizing, I'd strongly recommend it.
Well, that is a really great pitch. I couldn't have done it any better. Really do appreciate that. So this is the dashboard you've chosen for your spotlight. This is Pradeep Kumarji's HR attrition dashboard. So tell us about this dashboard. What do you like about it? Why did you choose it? What struck you about it, and how has it inspired you?
Yeah, so great questions on this one. So this was chosen for a couple different reasons. So it started as a class example where we're trying to decode what the message was in particular dashboards. So that was where I first learned of its existence. A secondary interest for me is just HR keeps coming up in my line of work. That sounds bad. HR data, like working with data, comes up in my line of work frequently. And I want to have a deeper understanding of it. So learning how different people visualize this kind of information actually helped my understanding of what working in HR might look like as opposed to working in student data might look like. So it kind of met those two criteria, which is why I thought it was interesting for me. In terms of what I like about it, I thought it did a pretty good job of giving me a quick overview of what's been going on as it pertains to employee retention or attrition. Um, and so I was able to take a glance and get a sense by kind of department and gender and age and so on of, where are we losing people, where are we not? So I thought that was good. I thought mostly the use of color worked really well. I have some reservations about the use of color on the survey score because it took me a while to figure out what the colors there meant. But overall, I thought it was pretty good. And in terms of kind of other small things that I might consider in improving on it, I found that table-ish at the bottom right that talks about recent attrition is a list of like every employee who has been attritioned, and it is a little bit hard to it's hard to make any use out of it as a consequence. It's almost too detailed. It felt to me like you already need to know who you're looking for in order to find them, but if you already knew that, what's the point? The other one, it's cut off in this screenshot, but bottom left where it says attrition trend, it's got some number of months across the bottom. But what tripped up a few of the students that I worked with, that's happened to me more times than I care to count in my own career, is the month of, I'm pretty sure it's May 2022 is the very end one on there. It's not a complete month. It only has up to May 8th, as you can see on the right-hand side there. And so what it looks like is attrition is trending up through most of the months, and then suddenly things get a lot better in May. But actually, that's only because we're stopping measuring at May 8th. So that's the other one is it's a good reminder for us all to make sure that when we're doing this kind of reporting, it's clear to our user when our cutoff point is and whether or not we're including incomplete months in it, because it might inadvertently impact the trends that we're looking at. And I found it inspiring because it got outside of the relative cookie cutter nature of just drag and drop stuff on as containered tiles and don't spend any time on the design. I thought the author of this spent a fairly significant amount of time getting the layout to work the way that they wanted and making effective use of backgrounds and keeping what is pretty complex data relatively simple.
Yeah, it does have a really nice modern formatted feel to it. And that's not something that I'm very good at. So I do appreciate that in other dashboards. So what did you learn from this dashboard, whether in terms of data analysis, storytelling, how it was built, that you think others might find interesting or informative?
Good question. So I answered a tiny bit of that previously. But I think what I'd add to that is what this one did fairly well is start at a higher level at the top left and work its way down relatively in a Z or Z pattern to more detail. And so that tends to be a best practice that you start people at a higher level and work your way into detail. I think if I had lots of time to play with it, I'd probably want to make it a little more interactive so that not everything is visible immediately and you get more detail if you click somewhere to get that additional information. I think that would make it less overwhelming and possibly more accessible as a result.
Can I just add a really quick comment on that? So that what you just described, trying to make it sort of more of a guided analytics process, is something that if you're going to Tableau conference and are attending the visual analytics bootcamp, that is something that they will cover in that session. And it's a great sort of like way to walk through how should I phrase this question or present this data to someone so that they actually are getting what you want out of it or what they should be getting out of it.
That's great advice. And the conference itself is awesome. I've been to 7 or 8 of them over the years, and I've always walked away feeling like I'm not quite as advanced as I thought, and I have all these new exciting things I can learn. And it's the only conference I've ever been to that I can say that about for multiple iterations of. You will almost certainly learn something there that you can apply in your work. So it's worth considering if you can be there.
100% agree. Well, I guess this wraps up our Meet a Community member. Thank you so much, Andrew, for everything, for always being on our Slack group, always helping to co-lead, always being, willing to jump in when we say, hey, we need a presenter, we need a Meet a Community member. It's really nice to have somebody like that.
Been my
And
pleasure. Thanks for having me.
I really appreciate the ability to be able to talk Canadianisms. Tim Hortons, Timmy's, Zed, all of these things, Andrew. Uh, we're totally gonna miss you, miss having these weekly conversations with you. Um,
Anytime.
all right, so we're gonna stay in the Pacific Northwest, sort of virtually in the Pacific Northwest, for our next presentation from Christian Adams at University of Washington. So Andrew mentioned earlier, when he saw that chart that the student emailed him about yesterday, he was like, "Oh yeah, this is really simple. It's really easy." Well, Christian had a similar situation when asked to put a Tableau Prep workflow onto the server and make it into an online data source. And he's going to tell us a little bit about that. So Christian is an analyst at the University of Washington, where he's worked for about 13 years. He's historically worked mostly with financial data, but recently switched over to a role that has him working more with student and faculty and research data. And if anyone has lessons on any of that, he is open to learning because there's so much in that bucket of student, faculty, and research data. We've been talking about prep a little bit more in the last year and a half than we had before. And Christian is here to kind of continue that theme and sort of step it up a notch. So he's going to show some challenges that UW faced when scaling from standalone Tableau Prep flows to published data sources on the server. So Christian, the flow is all yours. Did I do that badly? I think I did. I'll work on it for next time.
I think you nailed it. So I think you're doing great.
I feel like this is that like cake show or like it's called Nailed It. I think you either do it well or you do it poorly and the cake falls over. I feel like it was a cake fall over, but
Thanks, Roshni. Hi, everybody. My name is Christian Adams, he, him. Thank you for this opportunity. I've found the HETUG to be an extremely valuable resource in my journey and learning. Specifically, like I will call out Andrew, Ginny, and Roshni. They have all answered my questions in the Slack whenever I've had them. And so it's been a really great community to be a part of. So I am going to jump to my slide deck. Let me go back to the beginning. And so I assume y'all can see my PowerPoint?
yep.
Great. Thanks, Roshni. So again, just a little about myself. I'm an analyst at the University of Washington with a focus primarily in the financial analysis space, and I've been using Tableau for about 10 years. And Access was my first tool for pulling data. I learned it in college in my undergrad, and I liked it because it was visual. I could see, for any of you who might have used Access, not the SQL one, but like the click and drag tables. I liked it because I could see all the column names on the screen. I could visually do joins. It made a lot of sense to me. I could drag into that bottom section the fields I wanted in my outputted data set. And then, it felt like I was pushing a cassette player or a Discman. I'd hit the play button and then I'd get data. And so I really liked that, which I think is why prep has appealed to me. If you ask me the question of what's my favorite feature of the Tableau suite, it's probably prep because it's given me access to pulling and controlling my own data in a way that I am not capable. I am not good at writing SQL. It's not my jam. It's not the way my brain works, but I can read most of it. And I'm also not a Tableau server administrator. And so I want to say that to say I am going to focus on publishing a data set, the gains we got from publishing a data set, and those pieces with prep. But if you are going to go down this route or interested in this work, I highly advise you to get connected, involved with your Tableau server administrator as soon as you're thinking about doing that. So how did we get to publishing data sources? Where did that come from? So I work in a central finance office. And our role, we reported to the provost, and our role was essentially oversight of the financials of the entire academy. So that's the University of Washington, Seattle. That includes the Bothell Tacoma campus. And so it's paying attention to financially what's going on, identifying units who might be going in a negative trending direction, getting out ahead of that, and then any ad hoc analysis that the president or provost might require. And so I was brought in specifically for my skill sets in visual analytics and our ability to wrangle data so that we could be more proactive, more projecting, getting out ahead of these sorts of things as opposed to we've identified a deficit in this school. How bad is it? And hopefully we won't wind up on the cover of the Seattle Times. And so in that journey, we had gotten to a space to where we had published about 5 dashboards. They were on our server. They were used by a small handful of analysts, including myself. But it was painful to maintain and keep up. We were using Prep to extract data and create a data set for these dashboards, but that data set only lived on my machine because I was the only one with the Tableau desktop license. And then anytime we refreshed the data, I had to run Prep, get my data set. It would show up on my local machine. Then I'd have to open every dashboard we published, open it back up, refresh it, and then resubmit that dashboard to the server. And so we had visions of expanding our work, going much broader than the 4 or 5 we had, but it just wasn't sustainable to do this sort of local data set. We were also identifying a single point of failure in myself. Should anything happen to me? Should I leave the university? Should I suddenly forget how to use Tableau? We were sort of going to lose our ability to keep that ball moving forward. And honestly, the quantity of data we were working with and running it through Prep and refreshing was just a really slow process. And so we turned to publishing data as a way to sort of potentially tackle that. So just to give you an idea of what we're looking at from our data is we have a massive data warehouse with tons of data. The University of Washington is a huge university. And so we have tables that are the actual transactions that are happening. And then we have multiple dimensions tables that are attaching, what organization code is that budget number attached to? What type of funding is it? With state appropriations codes, names, orgs, with numerous dimension tables. Then we had planning data we were trying to bring in, then other miscellaneous data sorts like timetables and that sort of thing. And we were using Prep to bring all those tables together, clean the data, dump the data we didn't need, highlight, do some internal calculations to bring that data source size down. And then we eventually used Prep to publish the data on our server. By publishing the data on the server, we were able to, we still had to locally run Prep, but at least our dashboards had had data refreshing itself on the server. So I didn't have to constantly republish my data sets. This is what one of the flows looks like to pull all that data together. It's aggregating numerous tables of actuals results, and then numerous dimensions tables. It's doing some data cleaning, producing an output, and then which leads to another Prep flow here. And so what I just wanted to show here is we're not going to go into the details of the Prep flow, but just the level of complexity that we're talking about with this flow in particular. You can ignore the red exclamation marks. This flow works. It's just a little outdated with its pathways, and I just wasn't able to correct it in enough time to get a good clean snapshot. But this is just sort of showcasing how complex this flow got by the end of its life. As a final step, we publish the flow. And again, I'm not going to go into the details of this, but it's pretty easy to technically publish a flow if you've never done it. Once you're in Prep, you've got a good flow, you're comfortable with it. You choose your output to be published on the data source. You choose your server folder and name. And then when you're up in the server section, you click the server button, you push publish flow if you're signed into your server network, and then it sort of uploads itself. And so it's a really nice, clean exercise in that way. But there are some lessons learned. So I want to touch quickly on publishing the flow. So some of the reasons we published the flow is the final size of this data set was approaching about 1 gig. It was growing every month because we were getting new data, but it was an extremely large data set. It actually required us to break the flow into 3 separate flows. Otherwise, we would run into resource or bandwidth issues. The data needed to be refreshed at least once a month, but by the end of a fiscal year or nearing a fiscal year and close, we were refreshing this data set every day because we were closing out budgets, we were clearing deficits, things like that. When it would run on a local machine, it would take about 2 hours for that flow to run in completion. It would occasionally crash my computer, even though I had a pretty new computer that was pretty clean. And then my machine was effectively unusable while running the flow. And so when we went to COVID and fully remote, if my machine was offline, I was effectively useless while we were trying to run that flow. By comparison points, once we published the flow on the server and ran it that way, it could run in less than 15 to 20 minutes, and it wasn't using any of the resources of my own machine or a machine that we could use. So we got a ton of efficiency in that space. Other things we gained from publishing our data source was it made it easier to just refresh the data. By the time this office had been reorganized and moved into different spaces, we just recently went under reorg. We had 40 plus dashboards pointing at this data source. And so we were able to build a really robust ecosystem of dashboards, and we never had to worry about refreshing the data set individually on any dashboard. We just ran the flow, refreshed the online data source, and all of our dashboards updated. We were improving the accuracy of our analysis because we had one single source of data. Prior to this, every analyst had their own method for pulling data or getting data that they would refresh. Some of them use SQL, some of them use Access, some of them use the Power queries in Excel. But now with this singular data source, everyone had one use. Dashboard performance increased dramatically with the online source. I've seen recently when we've tried to shift back to publishing with the extract and the dashboard itself, or looking at our data warehouses, the time it takes for the server to look back, grab that data, pull it in, account for filtering is so much slower than if you have an online published data source. It just speeds up the performance, which then in turn has been my experience that it will speed up people using your dashboards. The design process for us has gotten a lot faster because we have some default templates and designs with our data sets now. Now that we have the online data source, we can default and create some things early that we know we'll probably need. And then we have an available data source that's already ready for ad hoc analysis. We don't have to pull new data. We don't have to identify new ways to get data. It's already there for us. So that's some of the quick gains we've had. But we had some hard lessons along the way. And so I can't say this enough. We have a great Tableau Server admin on our team. His name's Travis. He's a great resource, extremely helpful. But I did not involve him at the very beginning. I was doing this project for a while, and then I got a nice email from him saying like, hey, your data source is taking up the largest chunk of our server folder, and it's bigger than everyone else combined. Can we talk about this? And so I didn't know that there were server constraints and limits and that sort of thing. And so he and I got to work together. We have a good working relationship now. But if you're going to start publishing these things, if you're going to have an online data source, connect with your server admin at the beginning. You also need to ensure that your flows have access to any data that they're going to be running that prep flow on. So a lot of our stuff is pointing to our EDW warehouses where our data exists. Travis is again on point for ensuring that our server folders can access those sites. And so you need to ensure your flow can reach the data it needs to pull. Another lesson was including the data refresh data point in our data set and dashboards. For a while, a question I would often get is the data up to date? When was the last time you pulled it? And people aren't going to go and look back at the resource. So we started doing a date of extract calculation. It's just simply labeled date of extract, and it was the formula today. And so every time we reran that data set, it would pull the day's date. And then we would dump that date into like the bottom left-hand column of our dashboard to say the data was refreshed on February 11th. and it gave people some peace of mind that they were looking at up-to-date current data. Even though you might feel comfortable with your flow, I would highly recommend building an audit process that you regularly do on your data sets, just to make sure you're not dropping data off, make sure you're not losing data or something hasn't changed in the warehouse. It's also a good opportunity to invite your skeptics into the process, people who are maybe used to pulling data a certain way or don't want to make the transition to this new space. This is a good way to get them comfortable with the data and to help them see that, look, the data's fine, the data's accurate. It's the exact same you're already pulling, but it's already there for you. So it's a good chance to sort of build that component of your ecosystem up. And then I crashed our dashboards a couple times by making changes to the flow that I thought were simple and just running them through without testing them. And so don't do that. I would highly advise you to create a test environment that you can test changes to your flow or how you're publishing data, because there are sometimes these weird disconnects between prep flow and the server. And then when desktop looks at it, I've had, where a dimension measure name might have a space in it originally. And then if I change something in my flow and republish it, then that space goes away. And then my desktop dashboards don't work the way that they're supposed to because they don't find the name that they're looking for. If you're going to change the source of your data source or where it exists, you're going to want to test that to make sure that you can quickly just change your data sources quickly. And then removal of dimensions or measures, make sure that they're not being used in any dashboards that you might have already built or someone's relying on. So really build a test base and good documentation of what data points your dashboards are using. This is going to be towards the end. I think I rolled through this pretty fast and I apologize. But other things you should probably consider are when you publish a flow, the person publishing it, their name is attached as the owner. And so this is the single point of failure problem we have. We still don't have a solution for this, but my name is on the flow that gets published. And so I'm the only one that can refresh it. Now, long term, if I were to leave the university, we would figure out a way to cover this. Somebody else would get the license. But if you have two people on your team who have a creator license, you can sort of cover that work by, if you need to go on vacation for an extended period of time, that person can publish the flow and then be the owner. But it's just something to know that only the owner can run a flow that's published on the server, as far as I know. You also need to double check who can access your data. Our university has a lot of Tableau Server folders and a lot of security overlaid on each of them. You're going to want to work with your admin to ensure if you need security on this published data, that it's limited to people who can access it and not accidentally available to other groups or members. And then finally, desktop does not allow for relationships on published data sources, as far as I know. That's not been my experience. Like Andrew said, I like relationships. I'm just starting to get into them. I was working on a problem today that I think I'm going to solve with relationships. But that online data source or that published data source doesn't lend itself to that. And so there is a limitation on that piece. But that's the end of my deck. I just want to say I appreciate everybody giving me this opportunity, Roshni, Jenny, allowing me to do this. If there's any questions or anything I can answer, I'd be happy to. But other than that, thank y'all.
Thanks, Christian. That was really helpful. Definitely, there's a lot of conversation that is happening. A lot of hints on how to handle some of those challenges that you talked about with really large files and splitting up flows and things like that, having an audit process. So it seems like a lot of what you mentioned is resonating with folks. One question that I see, or sort of a question comment, is what suggestions you or other folks have about creating an audit? What does that process look like? Which team or teams do you need to get involved in that sort of thing? So if you could talk a little bit about that, that would be great.
Yeah, so the audits we did were, they're primarily designed to, we take our data source and then we match it to our university's financial of record. Whatever our official output sort of form is. So for us, that's Workday. We recently went live with Workday Financials, I think a couple of years ago. Prior to that, we had a homegrown system that was built on Cobalt. And so the audit is always ultimately, can we replicate the reports or outputs from that space? And we do matching. And then we have a sort of threshold of, can we get, 20 audits, 20 checks in a row that we've done. And so we do that on a sort of monthly basis where we'll grab 10 to 15 spots of the university. We've got dashboards that are already built to look exactly like the reports. And then we pick random parameters to run. And it's a pretty easy process. It probably takes like 20 minutes, like once a month. And then once you do this enough, you start to identify, well, here's a place where it happens more often than most. So I'm going to sort of add this space to my regular review. And so it sort of starts that way. It's not an official sort of like, we don't go to internal audit and ask them to do this. We don't necessarily partner with IT, because part of what this has allowed us to do is build a data source that I don't have SQL background to write code. I don't have access to a warehouse myself to put data in to run SQL code against, but I can do this. The other thing that we do is we really got into documentation of how we get to our data. So documenting our joins, documenting our naming conventions and that sort of thing. And so that audit, we will take the documentation and bring it to other experts of saying, we want to recreate this Workday report. Here's how we're organizing the data. Does this match? And so they'll audit just our logic to say, like, look, you're missing some contra ledger accounts. So you're probably flipping the sign in the wrong space a couple of times. So look into that. Or here's a resource IT has that lists all the contra ledger accounts. You might want to follow that wiki page in case new ledger accounts get added to that. And so those are the kinds of things that we've done internally. I hope that answers everyone's question, what we do.
Yeah, there's one other question that is out there just about the potential of automating this. So you guys do you have Prep Conductor? I think I missed that if you said you did. So
I think I do. Or I have the creator.
Okay, the builder piece. So I think
Yeah.
one of the questions is, how can we automate it if we don't have Conductor, which is like the cloud/server thing that I don't know if it is cloud or cloud and server, but which is now no longer a standalone part of
we
the
don't
Tableau
have it.
environment. It's part of data management. So that's been one of the challenges that we've seen as well on Tableau Prep. Like, it's great, everyone, but you have to have it on your computer in order to be able to run it and do anything around it. So like, have you talked about how you can try to automate that even with, having scripts on your local computer or whatever?
Yeah, so we do not have Conductor or whatever it's called these days. Our university doesn't pay for that add-on specifically, and so to refresh the flow, I have to go in and press the button, which takes all of 5 seconds. It's like the first thing I do in the mornings where I need to refresh. Without any solves, we've always limited the data we do like this to data that doesn't need to be up to date to the minute or the day necessarily. So when we're doing financial analysis at this scale, 99% of the time we're doing it on closed months. And so we're not doing what happened in the last day and a half. Like, we're a university, we're not the stock market. So we don't need data necessarily that quickly all the time. And so that's
Talk to your
one of the
endowment
work
folks.
Yeah, advancement's
But,
not my office, and we do the best we can, but they've got their own team. But yeah. But most of the time our work is good enough to be through closed months. And so that's one of the ways we have managed that component. It's my understanding, and it's in my list of goals for the next year, is I believe Python. Like, you can create scripts in Python that basically recreate the clicking of, like, navigating to the server, clicking the button. I just haven't learned how to do that, but it's my understanding that that's possible, and there are probably people on this call who are smart enough to talk through that. But that's not me.
If anyone has played with, I think it's the Tableau Prep client. Oh geez, the Tableau Prep client. There's some. I'm missing a word there. Uh, the CLI instance, I think, is how it's abbreviated. If someone has worked with that and has been able to do some automation of, clicking that button or at least publishing a flow or publishing the extract that comes out of a flow, we'd love to hear about it. Come talk to us. Go fill out the present at HETUG form. Because I know that like there's a lot of conversation. We've seen it in Slack as well. Because I think a few universities, at least I think the North Carolina UNC system has command line interface. That's what it is. Thank you, Andrew. Andrew Hart. I'm gonna miss this. So yeah, the command line interface does allow you to do some semi-automation. It does still require the computer that has prep installed and the license and all of that, but it can get you a little bit closer. I know that yeah, like UNC I think has been looking at alternatives, and there might be a few other schools um, that are in that same boat. So awesome. I don't know if I missed any other questions. There's a whole lot of conversation happening in the chat, which is amazing. I don't know that we've had this much conversation around a single presentation before, so good job. Uh, um, and yeah, so thank you for joining us today. We are going to talk to Christian again next month. But before we do that, we do want to hear well, that was the wrong button. We want to hear what you thought of today's meeting. Of course, I closed the tab that had all these links in it, so this is going to be fun. Ginny, if you have your computer handy, can you start copying and pasting links into the chat? We have the QR code and the form there. Tell us what you'd like. Tell us what you could do better. We always want to make these meetings as useful as they can be to you guys, the HETUG community. We do have our March meeting scheduled for, was it 5 weeks from today? And Christian's going to be back as our Meta community member. So we're going to be able to pepper him with questions the same way we did Andrew, but a whole different set of questions, like our normal, you're not a professor questions, I'm sorry. But I'm sure we're going to learn a whole lot of really cool things. And because it is March, and March in higher ed, at least in the States, is all about March Madness. So we've got a couple of March Madness-like sessions. One is March Maskness. So Rebecca Carr, David Lishka, and James Emery are going to talk about how to mask data in Tableau. They're going to show a few different options, including undocumented functions. Very excited to see these options. And then Artie Smith at Kent Dover School, I know it's not higher ed, but we're all about education here, is going to talk about a March Madness visualization or dashboard that he's built out to actually teach statistics at the Kent Dover School. And it's even because I believe the brackets are available or announced on March 16th. It's perfect timing. He's gonna do a whole bunch of fun statsy stuff with Tableau for us. And we're also going to talk a little bit about more about Tableau conference. We'll have more and better idea of what sessions are going to be available and what other events are going on. We've heard that there might be a few both K through 12 and higher ed evening events available and things like that. So we'll have hopefully a small list of know before you go tips and tricks for those who are attending the conference. And again, we always want to hear from you guys. So if you want to present or if you want to hear about something, if you have a speaker in mind or not, just fill out the the present at higher ed tug form so that we can, get speakers lined up for all of our meetings. We do meet monthly, as many of you probably know. Speaking of other meetings that might be happening, there's a whole bunch of really cool tugs coming up. CCC tug is actually underway right now. They're going to talk survey data. There's the Austin tug is, one of the things that Christian mentioned was sort of like building that relationship with your Tableau Server admin, and Andrew's our relationships guy. But building relationships with the people that you work with in your data viz practice is really important. So the Austin tug is having a session on managing up. The accessibility tug is having a Valentine's Day special on Friday. with Scott Eaton. The Flairledge twins are going to be at the Toronto Tug. See, we have to continue trying to get as much Canada in as we can. Uh, they're going to talk TC again, and again the Flairledge twins. That's next week, and then March 11th is a little while away, but the Public Sector Tug is also meeting. So check out all these other tugs. Or just go to usergroups.tableau.com and see what other sessions are out there. There's so many virtual and regional tugs out there that there's always something going on and there's always an opportunity to learn. So with that, I want to say thank you to everyone who came, who was here for any part of this meeting, to Andrew and Kristen for presenting and talking with us. And we hope to see you guys all next month.